Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Mary Burns. Mary is a mother of three, a teacher, and involved in addiction advocacy since her son's death. Her book, Saving Eric, was awarded the International Firebird Award in July 2023. Mary has been honored as an advocacy leader by the New Jersey chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence in 2017. She has also helped spearhead a walk called Changing the Face of Addiction to help change the stigma of addiction. The money raised is used by the Center for Prevention and Counseling to help those without resources that need addiction treatment services. Welcome, Mary. Please tell us a little more about your book, Saving Eric.
Well, my book is about my son, Eric, who struggled with mental illness, which led him to, unfortunately, drug addiction. And it's about how the difficulties of dealing with such issues, mental illness and drug addiction, and how difficult it is to really get treatment for individuals. And it's also about how those issues don't just affect the individual, but affect those who love them as well. So it's really a story of a very strong bond between myself and my son, and me trying to help him and save him basically from his issues. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about your son, Eric?
well, if I had one word to sum him up, I would say he was amazing. He was talented, he was smart, he was so many things, but unfortunately, he couldn't see all the things that he was. He really couldn't. And I don't know why. It's something that I don't understand, and I'll never understand it. But he, basically just didn't love himself. And he struggled with mental illness, bipolar disorder, and depression. And of course, often when people struggle with that, drugs seem to be the answer, or they give them relief until, of course, they become addicted. And then it just becomes, life becomes a living hell. But he was a great kid. He was funny. He was all those great things. And he was very athletic. He played sports right through high school. He was, baseball one year, he was on the All-Stars, Sussex County All-Stars. He played at the minor league stadium a couple of years in a row. I mean, he was the boy who had everything. So unfortunately, he couldn't see that though, but he was the boy who had everything.
Sounds sounds like a wonderful young man. Um, um, so what inspired you to start writing the book?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I never sat down and said, this would make a great story. I should publish a book. I just had, without sounding crazy, a little voice in my head just kept saying, you need to write this down. You need to start writing this down. And so finally, after many months of just constantly hearing that, I just sat down one day and just started writing. So, and then, I just continued, and years later, this book came together. So,
Um, Having read your book, how did you piece together the key events that you cover in the book? Like, did you do it from memory? Did you have some journals you kept throughout?
when I first started writing it, I just started. I started from the beginning and I just kept going. And then as time went on though, like through his struggle with addiction and through his, rehab stints, etc., then it was more like keeping a journal. I sort of just kept adding to it. But in the beginning, I just sat down and I just started to write and it just flowed out of me. But then, after a while, you edit it. I joined a writers group, and the writers group told me to make it more real, because my first copy was like, I said this and he said that. And they're like, well, put in dialogue, sort of give a description of where you were, put the people in, put your reader in your story. So I did a lot of editing, and then, I tried to make it a little more real. So I found like a letter that I wrote to him and a card that he wrote to me, and, communication with the psychiatrist, and a poem that I wrote, that kind of thing. So then I just sort of added those things in to make it maybe a little more real, or just maybe I put in a little more emotion too, which I'm not sure if the book needed more emotion.
I know that you mentioned that you read Beautiful Boy
Yes.
during um, at, at one point over the years. Um, did that impact you in writing since that was written from the father's perspective on his son's addiction?
I read it and it made me feel not alone, but I don't know if it impacted me because I don't know if at that point I was really thinking of, well, I guess I was thinking of writing. I was writing the book at that point, but I don't know how much that impacted me in terms of my writing style because I think he's different. If I remember correctly, he talks about a story and then he talks about drugs and addiction. Correct me if I'm wrong, like every other chapter, right?
I
And
believe so, yes.
yeah, and mine was just, it's a pure story. But I mean, it just talks about, both of them talk about how much you loved your kid and you wanted to do what you could for them, that kind of thing. But I don't think I mirrored him, at least not on purpose. If anything, when I started writing the book, I remember not wanting to read any more stories because I wanted it to be my story and not like somebody else's story. Because I was afraid I would end up mirroring somebody without really even wanting to. So
Um, did you do any research outside of like to write the book? Did you do any research about the topics, or did you just go
not,
on memory?
no, not really. It's just really my story and how things affected me and him and my family. I tried not to put too much of my family in. My husband sort of didn't want to be in the story, but you know, it affects everybody. So no, there was really no research. It's a memoir. It's really a memoir. It's about his struggle, how his struggle affected everybody else, in particular me, because I was the one that was dealing with him, I think, closest. So
Your work with changing the face of addiction and the Center for Prevention and Counseling is about getting resources for those who need addiction treatment services. Was that surprising to you to discover, like, insurance, especially how they treat um, the patients, how they see the addict, and how they don't want to fund things for a long time?
actually, I've been fighting. I started working with Senator Bramnick and I've been working with, now it's former Senator Oroho. There's a law on the books in New Jersey. It's called Bill S3. And it states that insurance companies have to pay up to 180 days of treatment per calendar year. But they only require them to cover 28 days of inpatient treatment. And my thing is that people need more than 28 days of inpatient treatment. And I wanted it changed to at least 90 days. Anybody you talk to in the addiction field or in the field of, counseling will tell you it takes 90 days for the brain to heal. So they're not even giving them 90 days. And then I wanted from there, then we need some good halfway houses or follow-up care. And I was told after, gosh, I think I ran around in circles for about 2 years on this, that eventually they finally did a cost analysis and that it would cost the consumer, meaning the people that pay for insurance, too much money. So it's really horrible because most people that have been in and out of 28-day programs will tell you that they weren't ready to leave after 28 days. Ready. And they, even my son said, Mom, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it. He didn't admit it to us at the time, but later on, when we had many conversations, the last 11 and a half months of his life, he was in recovery. And he said, I knew I wasn't ready. And I've heard that from so many people. So my issue is give people the right kind of treatment when they're ready. I mean, they have to be ready, and give them long-term treatment. And then maybe we wouldn't have so much relapse. Okay. Because,
Mhm,
you know, and when people relapse, like with my son, every time he relapsed, he fell deeper into the hole of depression and he
mhm,
couldn't get himself out of it. So it made it harder for him the next time to do it. So it's just, it's horrible because, I say to people, if my son had had cancer, he'd probably still be here today because if he needed a year's worth of treatment, he would get it.
mhm.
He would have gotten it. And I
Yes.
also, I, three people that I know, their children had addiction issues and their insurance companies paid for 11 months of treatment. One was after the 28 days, or maybe she got 90, I'm not sure, of inpatient. She went into a very well-run, like halfway house or residential program where it was like she worked, etc. And they're all fine. They're all raising families. They're all productive members of society. My son got 28 days, and then after he relapsed, they wanted to give him 10 days. And it's just, you know what? it's not enough, but people don't want to listen. There's thinking in the addiction community that there's many paths to recovery, and there might be, but if somebody, especially a young person, really wants to get well, give them what they need, you know? And we're not. And it really upsets me because maybe my son would still be here if he had gotten what he needed right away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 28 days is, I mean,
Yeah.
I've done a lot of, this is a topic that I've researched a lot. I had a friend, and 28 days is nothing.
Well,
28 days.
I actually researched once why they got to that number. And what I read was that the Air Force decided that if people had to leave their post for treatment for, I guess it was more alcoholism at the time, maybe a drug addiction, but alcoholism, they would own, they decided on 28 days was what they would give them because more than that, if they were gone from their post more than 28 days, they had to reassign them. So from what I read, there was no medical basis for 28 days. It was a convenience for the Air Force.
But each drug would require a different, and when you look at opioids, that's
The brain, even if you want to get well, the brain, I always say the brain remembers how the drug once made it feel. In other words, the brain constantly reminding them and constantly wanting the drug. And it's just so hard to get over. And it takes a long time. And the right kind of treatment would help a lot of people. I don't think we'd see the relapse rate. And actually, there was a study done, and I think it was in the 70s. I can't remember, but in the 70s, they used to give 90 days, and this was for alcoholism. Because with alcoholism, if you don't have medical care, you could actually die when you
Mhm.
detox. And they decided to go from the 90-day model to the 28-day model for whatever reason, and the relapse rate went up. So, and they will say that the longer the treatment, the better chance that you won't, less chance that you'll relapse. But there's all kind of what kind of treatment? Like, I really believe that my son needed 90 days at least in an inpatient facility so that he could form new habits, his brain could heal, and he could get himself, just on the right track. And he wasn't afforded that. So, yeah, it's sad.
um,
It's really sad. And there's
it
a
is.
lot of people out there, that are struggling. And it's really sad that no one's listening. But like I said, the addiction community is under this guise that, well, there's all different forms of recovery. And there might be, but some of those people that are now recovering in a different manner, okay, have been relapsing for 10 years or 20 years. And I'm thinking maybe we could cut that down a little, but no one's listening to me. So I tried though. I did try.
I guess other than the insurance and the 28 days, what was one of the most surprising things that you learned while writing the book?
I was thinking of that question before, we came on, and I don't know if I could say there was anything surprising. I mean, it was very emotional, obviously it brought me back. And sometimes I would be writing something, I'd be typing real furiously, and I find myself, tears running down my cheeks. But I don't know if there was anything surprising. I don't think so. No, not with the actual writing. The publishing and everything else, maybe so, but not with the writing.
Well, that's my next question. What was your publishing journey?
Well, I was pretty lucky. I had gotten it edited, which is a big proposition to get a book edited. It's expensive, right? But we finally finished the editing process, and I was pretty quick. I started putting it out, I think in like September, and by November I had gotten to contracts. So I was lucky that way. And I didn't self-publish. I have Austin Macaulay, which is an international company. They're based out of England. So they took the book and, so I got it published pretty easily. I think what is not so much surprising, but hard is marketing it. Even though it's on Amazon and it's, in Barnes and Nobles and here and there, online, it's hard to get people to actually, buy it. And I've had, it's hard. I mean, I've gone to libraries and I've had some, in-person readings, And it's great, but you get, a few people here and there. And it's great, but it makes it hard. Like I was, hoping to sell thousands of copies, of course, like everybody. But yeah, so that's the hardest thing I think right now is the marketing of it and trying to get it out there. And of course, the book was published right as COVID started, so all the in-person readings
Hmm.
weren't happening. And like I try to get to Barnes and Noble yet, and for I mean I have to go back there, but they were still not doing in-person reading. So it's just really tough. It came out at a bad time as well. But you know what? I have hopes. I feel like there was a reason why I wrote the book. I feel like that little voice in my head was, and it would pushed me forward. It wouldn't leave me alone. It was like, I have to publish this book. I have to do like, I can't, I have to do it. I told my husband, even if it doesn't get published, I have to edit it and I have to say that it's done. Like I had to get to that point where it was done. And so, but publishing wise, it got published pretty quickly.
The story is timeless. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the topic is, and your story is one that even if, several years down the road, it'll still, you can still promote it and sell it because
Yeah.
so many people
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
relate.
It's funny. I get different reactions from different people. I have people that are just like that have had issues with drugs and alcohol, and they're like, "My God, you told my story. Thank you so much." And then other people that have never had any interaction with, or any what's for words, any experience with addiction or mental illness, they're just like, oh my God, like they just can't even believe it. So it's interesting and it is timeless because yes, unfortunately the problem will probably be around for forever. So unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Um, have you had memorable reader encounters? Any that you'd like to share?
Well, I had one, which I think is, I mean, I've had a lot actually. A lot of people have called me and talked to me, but I had a woman one night call me on the phone and she said, I never do this. She goes, but I had to find you and talk to you. And she was from Manhattan. I did not know her. And she said, oh my God, I read your book. I have to talk to you. She had a son who she adopted because my son Eric was adopted. And she named him Eric and he struggled with mental illness and he had just died of drug addiction the year earlier. So she was just like, you wrote my story, and we probably talked on the phone for about an hour and a half, but it was just uncanny. It was so many parallels. And she said, I had to find you. I've never done this before, but I had to find you and talk to you. So that was very different and unexpected, but
That's definitely a memorable encounter.
yes.
Wow. Uh,
Yeah.
that is kind of eerie, the
Yeah,
parallel.
it is, but it was, I mean, it's nice to know because I do, people do say stuff to me, and it is nice to know that you've made some sort of a meaningful impact with your story on them in some way or the other. I mean, sometimes it's sad, but sometimes like her, I mean, it was sad, but she was just like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like she was just grateful that somebody put it out there because I don't think if you have never experienced dealing with addiction or mental illness that you understand it at all. I know I didn't. I really didn't. You know, you think everybody's, crazy or they're not good parents or whatever, but that's not the case. And it's really a difficult thing to deal with. Both things are difficult to deal with. So
I think mm, there's a lot of books out on the the addict themselves have written
mhm.
stories of their journey through rehab and through addiction, um, but not as many from the parents' point of view. And um, it
No,
really is, it's heart wrenching. It's heartbreaking to read how you lived, like you're just living in this like just dread bubble, like what comes next, like what's
that's
going
it.
to happen, um
Yeah.
what's the next phone call going to be,
Yep.
and go ahead.
That's exactly how you live from day to day because you don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of the books that the addicts write, talk about their drug use. And some of them talk about it in such detail that I have a hard time reading it. I can't read it. And I didn't want that. I just wanted to show the relationship and how difficult it is. So yeah, it's yes, from a different viewpoint. And I think people need to see that viewpoint because I really don't think people understand it unless they really live it. So yeah. So yeah, I don't know if there's as many from the parents' point of view by any means. So anyways, yeah, whatever. It's heart wrenching, but I think it's people see the emotion and it's hard. They'll see how difficult it is. So anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. All the phone calls, all the from from him, how you explained that, they sounded very similar, but that's you kind of gave us a glimpse into at the different steps, at the different stages, the phone calls, and how painful it would be for you to live through it and to listen, and it's your child and you love them and you don't want to deny them, but you have to.
Yeah, at some point you do, and it's very unfortunate. It's very difficult. I know when we brought him up to Connecticut, to the rehab there, and we paid for that because our insurance company just wasn't going to do what he needed. And if I knew then what I knew now, I would have taken the 28 days and then paid for something right out of pocket because he went through 3 years of in and out of recovery, where if maybe he had, like I'd said earlier, gotten the whole year all at once, it might have made a big difference. But a lot of I've never had any experience with this, and a lot of people don't have any experience with this. So you're always sort of running behind the eight ball, and everything is you're in crisis mode. The first time we sent him to rehab, it was because I mean, I knew he admitted to using drugs and he had gone to outpatient treatment, which was a waste of time. But like all of a sudden, you could see that he's starting to slip. And with him, he had some anger issues. So you knew like it's crisis mode, like you're going to have to send him somewhere, and then you have to make this like split-second decision, and you have to sort of rely on what your insurance company going to cover for you because it's expensive. So it's tough. It's very emotional. It's very difficult, but yeah, I think people need to understand that. And maybe when people start understanding it, things will start changing. It's hard. But I think with understanding, a lot of times that's when you start getting change. So,
Yes, I
and it was
agree.
hard to put my story out there. Like I felt like something was telling me I had to write it, but it's very personal too. So it was a little difficult. And I thought twice about it, but I said no, something just kept pushing me forward. So I went forward with it. So I'm hoping it does some good.
Yep. Speaking of, I said, I just finished reading it. The dreams that you describe, having, and how it led you to writing and your advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about the dreams? And I think most found most interesting was your interpretation of what each
Yeah.
of them meant.
Yeah. I had it was, let's see, about 6 months after he died. I think there were three dreams that he came to me in. And they were so vivid. I mean, it was like he was with me. It was so weird. Like I would wake up and it was just so odd. So I just felt like he was telling me something. And one of the dreams, or a couple of the dreams, one of them, I just felt like he was telling me that he's okay. Like I kept saying, "What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing tomorrow?" I think it was. And he was like not answering me. And then he just sort of slowly goes away. And I'm thinking, well, in heaven, there probably is no tomorrow. He's fine. And then the other one with him behind the wheel driving in the car, I really felt like that was telling me that, in death, he's free. And even though I sometimes wish I had called the book something else, I named it Saving Eric because I couldn't save him. But at some point at the end of the book, I do say that in death, I feel like he was saved. He was saved from the demons that tormented him during his life. So I felt like that one dream really was speaking to that. And then there was the one about the old lady, which I decided she was addiction, and I had to save people from addiction. So I think that's what really led me to the advocacy work, because I feel like they were so vivid. I just felt like they were telling me something. And so I don't know, you can make what you want of it.
No, I tend to agree. I am a believer in the visitation, your dreams, as they say, where they're letting you know that they're at peace, and that's
You also have to, if you remember all the rainbows I've seen, I mean, that rainbow in front of my house after he died a month, it went from one end of my property to the other, right across my front yard. And I saw more rainbows and halos around the sun. I don't know if you know what that is. They're rainbows that make a circle around the sun. I
Mhm.
saw more of those the first 2 years after he died than I've ever seen in my lifetime. So, and a rainbow is a bridge between heaven and earth, or it means God's promise. So I do believe that there is another realm and he is there and he is okay. And he has been saved from the demons that haunted him here. So, yeah, and I think the dreams and the rainbows all told me that. So,
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. Um, is there a key message you'd like us to take away from your family story?
a key message, I guess, to not judge those that struggle with mental illness and drug addiction, not to judge their families because it could happen to anyone, and just to understand the difficulties of it and that we need some change. And then if we ever get to the point where we could see some of that change to support it because it's necessary. I mean, people should not have to go in and out of recovery 10, 15, 20 years, and a lot of times I think personally it's because they're not getting the help to begin with, and I'm not saying nobody would die from addiction if they got a year's worth of treatment. I mean, no matter what disease you have, even with the best of treatment, some people still pass. But I just think that it gives people a better opportunity to get well. And if they do relapse, then they have tools to hopefully help them get back on track. So, yeah, I think the key takeaway is to just to try to understand the issue and support change for it.
And my final question, can you share a favorite memory of your son, Eric?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, when he was little, he was just the cutest thing. He was so talented and amazing. But I guess if I really had to put uh, I'd pick something, I'd have to pick, it's in the book, it's called A Beautiful Day. I'm gonna get emotional. It was the fall before he died. And we went for a walk. I'd go visit him every other weekend. It was my birthday weekend. And we just took like a 20-minute walk into the city to have ice cream. And he was just so excited about being drug free. And he just felt so amazingly good. And it was just such a wonderful day. I had the best conversation with him. And it was a great memory. So, and still can't figure out what happened. I say, drugs, like I said, they always, they haunt a person, and if they see a weak time, they go right in there and remind them of how they could make them feel. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it takes their life, which happened with Eric. But yeah.
Oh, I thank you so much for talking to us about your son, about your book, Saving Eric, about your work with Changing the Face of Addiction and the Center for Prevention and Counseling. Um, we wish you the best of luck
All right.
with
Thank you.
with promoting the book and getting the word out there and your advocacy work. But thank you again for joining us this evening. And
Well, thank you for having me. It was nice. Thank you.